get in here. Aren't you a little bit early? I'm not even ready yet. What time is it? Oh, no, you're right. It is time. Sorry about that. I just got distracted reading this book of ghost stories. Aren't ghosts fascinating? I just got this new lair, and it's crawling with ghosts. Most of them are a little bit shy, but they insisted that today's special be dedicated to them. So let's get started. Oh, let me change real quick. Ah, much better. All right, let's get started. Welcome to the Halloween special. Yeah, I wasn't feeling it either. Needs a little bit more oomph. Alexa, engage Essence of Vincent Price.
How many times do I have to tell you? My name is Minerva, not Alexa.
I'm sorry. I got confused. I went over to a friend's house earlier, and his house ghost was named Alexa. She was really into partying, was always playing music and stuff.
You're messing with me, right? Oh no, you're serious. Well, to start off with, I'm not a house ghost. I'm a crystal ball ghost.
Ooh, like a genie?
No, not like a genie. We grant knowledge, not wishes. I am so tired of genies getting all the attention.
Oh, I'm sorry. If it helps, I think you're way cooler than a genie. I even think you're cooler than my old crystal ball. So, will you engage the essence of Vincent Price, pretty please?
Fine.
Yes! Welcome to the Witch's Brew Halloween Special! The notion that there is life after death is as old as history itself. Even our earliest ancestors believed that the soul continued after the body perished. But the first recorded ghost story wasn't written until the 1st century AD by a Roman author and statesman by the name of Pliny the Younger. This early ghost story comes from a letter that our friend Pliny wrote to Roman Senator Licinius Sura. He wanted to know what Sura's thoughts were on ghosts and if he was a believer. In his travels, Pliny had collected all sorts of tales about spirits. The following, which was included in his correspondence to Sura, was a second-hand account. Quote, "There was in Athens a large and roomy house, which had such a bad reputation that no one lived there. In the dead of the night, a noise resembling the clashing of iron was frequently heard, which if you listened more attentively sounded like the rattling of chains. Distant at first, but approaching nearer by degrees, immediately afterwards a spectre appeared in the form of an old man, of extremely emaciated and squalid appearance, with a long beard and disheveled hair, rattling the chains on his feet and hands. The distressed occupants, meanwhile, passed their wakeful nights under the most dreadful terror imaginable. This, as it broke their rest, ruined their health and brought on distempers, even leading to death. Even in the daytime, though the spirit did not appear, yet the impression remained so strong upon their imaginations that it still seemed before their eyes and kept them in perpetual fear. Eventually the house was entirely abandoned to the ghost, being deemed absolutely uninhabitable." End quote. Centuries later, ghosts continue to have a presence in our mind, and as the debate on their existence continues, more stories arise and even possible evidence to try and prove they are real. Now that we know a little bit about the origin of ghost folklore, let's talk about how ghosts spook their way into our popular culture in a segment I like to call Fascinating Facts from a Floating Head.
Hey! Oh, I got a gig? Sweet! Well, thank you. As you were saying earlier, ghosts are people's souls that continue to exist after their bodies have died. Another word for ghost can be spirit, phantom, or phantasm. These terms can, for the most part, be used interchangeably. However, sometimes when talking about ghosts, people will throw around the word ghoul. Ghouls, however, are not the same thing as ghosts. They are more closely related to demons. They are blood-drinking, corpse-eating, grave-robbing entities. They are what you would get if you combined vampires, zombies, and ghosts, putting it loosely. They are most certainly not human souls. In other words, my ex.
Okay, well, that was informative. Oh, but I still have a question. What exactly are ghosts supposed to look like?
Oh, that's actually a really good question. If we're talking full body apparitions, ghosts, both in the arts and in real life, will usually look as they did when they died, usually sporting the clothes they were buried in. Now, the idea that ghosts are transparent was made popular by Charles Dickens when he described the ghost of Jacob Marley in A Christmas Carol.
Okay, that makes sense. So, where does that wispy blob ghost come from? You know the one I'm talking about, from all the Halloween merch. Kind of like Casper?
Oh yeah, that's actually a really funny story. Well, like I said, ghosts look just like what they did when they died. And their being transparent wasn't a huge thing until 1843 when Christmas Carol was published. So before then, when theatres had to put on plays that featured a ghost, it was hard to tell apart the characters that were living and the ones that were ghosts. The solution they came up with was to portray ghosts as still wearing their burial shrouds. Shrouds look like your typical bedsheet, and when kids started trick-or-treating at the turn of the century, a bedsheet ghost became a very popular and inexpensive costume. Due to its popularity, the bedsheet ghost naturally made its way to the mainstream media. In 1939, the comic Casper the Friendly Ghost made its debut, only further cementing the wispy blob ghost as the most popular image for a ghost. And now, as you said, we see it everywhere.
Oh, very cool. Oh, why did they say boo?
I mean, I don't. But the idea that ghosts say boo isn't really that complex. As early as the 1500s, people were playing around with short syllables and hard consonants to scare people. The earliest written record of boo comes from Scotch Presbyterian eloquence displayed, in which Gilbert Crockett says that boo is the word you say to crying babies to get them to shut up. How messed up is that? Anyhow, by the 1800s, boo was the go-to word to scare anyone and anything. Even kids would scream boo at aggressive geese to stop them from attacking them.
Great job, Minerva. I think our viewers learned a lot. Everybody give it up for Minerva. But now, there is just one question remaining. Do ghosts exist?
Dude, I'm right here.
Oh, I believe in ghosts. But some people may need a little more convincing. And what better way than to find ghosts out in the real world? That's right, folks. It's time for On the Broom.
Hold on tight, witches. Welcome to On the Broom. Before we get to our main destination today, St. Augustine, we are going to do a bit of time travel. You see, I moved this year, and on the way to my new lair, I made a brief pit stop in a city famous for its ghost stories, the Big Easy itself, New Orleans. Our two destinations have this in common. You can't throw a stone anywhere in these cities without hitting something haunted. As you walk through these old cities, it is very probable that you may be walking right on top of where someone is buried. Yes, that is the level of haunted we are dealing with today, so brace yourselves. Perhaps the most haunted house in New Orleans, and said to be the most haunted house in America, is the LaLaurie Mansion. This lavish home in the French Quarter once belonged to an evil woman named Delphine LaLaurie. She regularly took pleasure in causing pain to her slaves. Then one fateful day in 1834, the mansion caught fire. It revealed the horrific living conditions of many of the slaves who were being tortured mercilessly by her. The fire was said to have been caused by a slave who had been chained in the kitchen as a means to expose the way that she and others were being treated. Madame Delphine fled and was never heard from again. The New Orleans press used this to give Madame Delphine the bad reputation she truly deserved. Now it is believed that most of the spirits that haunt the house are those of the deceased slaves replaying their torture to anyone who will bear witness. Our next ghost haunts a local restaurant called Muriel's. A man named Pierre-Antoine Lepardi-Dorda used to live here. Ready for another fire? One day in 1788, the building caught fire and Pierre would spend years rebuilding his home, only to lose it again in a poker game in 1814. Distraught by the loss of his home, he committed suicide. Pierre would go on to haunt the premises, and when Muriel's open, he would scare away customers, throwing plates and glasses around. The owners decided to have a seance and contact Pierre and see if they could appease him. Turns out he was confused and offended by the parties happening in his home, and that he wasn't invited to. Really, what he thought were parties were just people having dinner. Still, the owners apologized and promised to invite him to every party from then on. He requested that they leave a table set for him so he could join in on the festivities. If you visit Muriel's now, you can see that there is in fact a table set for Pierre, and if you take a picture, he can sometimes be seen sitting there, enjoying being included. Alright, New Orleans, it was nice to take a quick peek for the first time. We'll be back real soon to do a whole episode just for you. Now the broom will take us to one of my favorite places in the whole world, St. Augustine. As the nation's oldest city, it is no wonder that St. Augustine is one of the most haunted places in America. This gorgeous city has such an abundance of ghost stories that it would be impossible to fit them all into one episode. So you bet I will be back here again too, also because I just really love it here. For today's episode, here are some of my favorite ghost stories from the ancient city. Our journey begins at the city gates. Back in the day, it was the only way to get into St. Augustine. Here, the ghostly apparition of a young girl named Elizabeth is often seen waving to cars and passers-by. The story of her life and death are a bit muddled, except for the time period which most agree was the early 1800s. Some sources say she was the victim of a yellow fever outbreak that swept throughout the city and left so many dead that they had to be buried outside the city gates in unmarked graves. The most popular story is that Elizabeth was the gatekeeper's daughter, who loved to accompany her dad and wave to visitors, and she later died of typhoid at the age of 9. I'm not sure which one of these is true, but I definitely believe she is real. While filming this episode, my boyfriend went to get us food to bring back to our hotel, and he happened to pass the gate and he noticed a young girl was waving at him. He thought nothing of it since she appeared to be with a group of people, so he waved back. But when he looked again, the girl had vanished and the group crossed the street without her. If you ever find yourself at the city gates, be sure to wave hello to Elizabeth. She may just wave right back. Our next story begins with Henry Morrison Flagler, an oil tycoon responsible for what would become the Florida East Coast Railroad. He would go on to build several hotels along his railway, but his pride and joy was without a doubt the Ponce de Leon Hotel, which opened its doors in 1888 and would eventually become Flagler College in 1968. When Flagler passed away, his body was shipped to his beloved hotel for public viewing in the hotel's rotunda. When this procession was taking place, it is said that a strong, mysterious wind slammed all the doors shut, trapping Flagler's spirit inside. Even more strange was the next day, when a janitor took notice of a tile that no one had ever seen before and was unlike any of the other tiles in the rotunda. A tile which had what appeared to be Henry Flagler's face. According to legend, when the wind slammed the door shut that fateful night, his spirit crashed into this tile, imprinting his ghostly face on it for eternity. Flagler isn't the only one haunting the college. Perhaps one of the most active ghosts is that of one of Henry's several mistresses. Flagler's wife would often barge in on the two lovers, so Henry would take his mistress to the 4th floor of the hotel and hide her in a room that was full of mirrors. It turns out this was a psychomantium. Henry used it to conduct seances, as he was an enthusiast of the occult, though other sources also claim it was she who made the room into a psychomantium. It is believed that his mistress had a paranormal experience in that room that drove her insane. Or maybe it was the grief over Henry not leaving his wife. Or perhaps it was even substance abuse. But eventually she took her own life by hanging herself from a chandelier. Her restless spirit still roams the 4th floor. Her room was later turned into a janitor's closet due to the fact that no student would stay there longer than a month because of terrifying disturbances at night, including screams and the bed shaking violently. If you come for a visit, be sure to get a good look at her 4th floor window. It's either this one or this one. You may just catch a glimpse of the woman in black, as she has come to be known.
We're about to go on a ghost tour to get a more in-depth look at the ghostly history of St. Augustine. Stay tuned.
Hey there! Hope you're enjoying the Halloween special so far. But now, it's time for a snack. Welcome to Witch's Kitchen. In today's episode, we've been discussing ghosts, and they inspired me to make today's dish, the phantasm. Now, a phantasm isn't your typical flan. True to ghost legend, it is translucent. Now I know you're wondering, Olly, how on earth are you going to make a flan translucent? Well, hold on. I'll show you.
This recipe was inspired by the invisible pumpkin pie, concocted by some very creative people at a Chicago restaurant called Alinea. If you want to learn more about that and how to make it, I will leave some links in the description. A typical flan has a bouncy base topped with caramel sauce. This is where I had to get creative, because I needed to replace the golden colors that make up a flan with clear and white colors. To achieve this, I decided to use plain gelatin flavored with the dominating flavors of flan, vanilla and caramel. In order to keep my gelatin clear, I used clear flavorings. The clear part of my flan is a nod to transparent ghost, but the topping pays tribute to our white blob chic ghost and ectoplasm. I replaced the caramel drizzle with condensed milk, and then I encased the dessert in a white chocolate shell ready to be cracked. Here are the special ingredients you'll need: unflavored gelatin, clear extracts of vanilla and caramel, sweetened condensed milk, white chocolate melts. I'm using Ghirardelli, but feel free to use whatever white chocolate you like. And some balloons. First things first, let's get our gelatin ready. Prepare a half a cup of chilled water, then pour 1 packet of gelatin powder on top. Don't stir. I know you'll want to, but don't do it. Just trust me on this. Let this sit for 5 minutes. While we wait, let's prepare the flavor. Now you're going to want your phantasm to be pretty solid, so use the minimum amount of water. I'll only be using a little over 1 cup to boil. Add a few drops of your caramel and vanilla extract, as well as half a cup of sugar. Now let's multitask. While the water boils, put about 8 ounces of your white chocolates into a metal bowl and place that bowl right on top of your pot. This will double boil your chocolates, melting them but not burning them. Stir until smooth. Once you have fluid consistency, remove your bowl from the heat and dip your balloon in the coating. You're going to want to cover about half the balloon with chocolate. Once coated, put that bad boy in the fridge to set. Do not use the freezer, as that will cause the chocolates to soften. By now your flavoring should be well integrated with that boiled water, so remove from the heat and add your chilled gelatin to the pot. Stir until completely dissolved. Then pour into 6-ounce cups and place in the fridge for at least 3 hours, though best results occur overnight.
And now for the fun part. It's time to plate our dessert.
As you can see, I've added the sweetened condensed milk to the top of our phantasm, giving it a fun ectoplasmic look. Cut your balloon to release the air inside without popping it. Once you have your ghost shell freed from the balloon, go ahead and cover your little ghost. I'll be using the condensed milk to stick on some small and medium-sized chocolate melts for the eyes and mouth. And now, our final step, cracking open this spooky boy and enjoying the jiggly fruits of our labor.
And now, back to On the Broom.
Welcome to the tour. I will be your narrator since, due to the nightlife, it can be difficult to hear our tour guide at times. This is also why our guide is not wearing a mask. Fear not, he kept his distance and we did wear our masks. That being said, let's get started. Just beyond the city gates is the Huguenot Cemetery, established in 1821 and closed due to full capacity in 1884, courtesy of the aforementioned yellow fever outbreak. Surrounding the cemetery and many other parts of the city are thousands of unmarked graves, something to keep in mind if you're ever taking a stroll in the ancient city. One very famous ghost, whose body was once interred here at Huguenot while there was still room, was that of Judge Stickney, who died in 1882, 2 years before the cemetery reached full capacity. His family, who had moved to Washington, D.C. shortly after his death, would later send for his body so it could be buried closer to the family. During this process, gravediggers left his plot unattended and Stickney's prized gold teeth were stolen. His ghost is seen frequently, roaming the Huguenot Cemetery at night, despite his remains no longer being there. It is believed that he is still looking for his gold teeth. Take a look at this picture I took of where Stickney used to be buried. Could this figure be Judge Stickney? I guess you will have to decide for yourselves. Next on our tour is the Castillo de San Marcos, the oldest masonry fort in the continental US. The Castillo de San Marcos was completed in 1695 to protect and defend Spain's claims in the New World. It is a national monument and more than 315 years old. The fort is the oldest structure in St. Augustine and, of course, haunted for many reasons. It overlooks Matanzas Bay, which got its name due to the many bloody battles that stained its waters red. Ghostly faces can be seen in the dark water at night. Another story involves a sordid love affair between a colonel's wife and his charming assistant. In 1784, Colonel Garcia Marti and his young wife Dolores arrived in St. Augustine to start a new life. The colonel was assigned an assistant by the name of Captain Manuel Abella. Marti was a cold man who often mistreated and neglected Dolores. This drove her right into the arms of the handsome Captain Abella. One night, they snuck around to meet each other, but were ultimately caught by Marti. No one knows for sure what happened, but the two lovers were never seen or heard from again. And when Marti was asked what happened to Dolores, he would simply say that she was off living with family. Years later, as local legend goes, a man exploring the Castillo heard some hollow sounds coming from within the walls. He decided to investigate and unearth two skeletal remains that appeared to be holding each other tightly. Did Marti bury these lovers alive within the walls of the fort? We will never know for sure, but when you visit, be sure to sniff the air for Dolores' perfume, which guests often smell while exploring the Castillo. Last but not least, let's talk about the grand finale of our tour, the Tolomato Cemetery. I have included footage from both our current tour and from earlier in the day when I was visiting and paying my respects. This place is dear to my heart. It is where I took my first ever ghost tour, and it has my favorite ghost stories from St. Augustine. But first, a bit of history. Native Americans were the first to live on this land that was once a village. Then came the Spanish, the British, and the Americans. It became a cemetery in the 1700s, and burials took place here for more than 150 years. It was St. Augustine's designated Catholic cemetery, and only Catholics were allowed to be laid to rest within its confines. Now, let's get into the stories. Our first story is that of the Lady in White. 300 years ago, a young bride was getting ready for her wedding. She was ready to head to the church dressed in her white wedding gown, but she would sadly never make it to the ceremony as she tragically died that very same day. Some say it was a spider bite, others say it was illness. Whatever the case, she was buried in her wedding dress, and many claim to see her gliding across the cemetery at night. If you ever happen to see her, be sure to take her picture. It is her wedding day, of course. This next story is my favorite of all the ghost stories in the ancient city. It is called the Apopanax Tree. It came from entries from the journal of a decorated colonel who lived in St. Augustine at the time. In the 1820s, Florida became a U.S. territory. Despite Spain no longer having claim, many Spanish families still remained. During this time, a colonel by the name of Joseph Smith moved to St. Augustine and was soon invited to a ball at the house of one of these distinguished Spanish families. It was here that the colonel first met the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. To his dismay, the beautiful woman was already married. Despite his heartache, he remained friends with the woman and her husband, though he secretly pined for her in his journal. One day, only a few weeks after the ball, the woman grew ill and died a week later. The colonel was invited to attend the funeral. Typical of old Spanish custom, the deceased beauty was carried to the Tolomato Cemetery while propped up in a chair. The colonel watched the sad sight, never taking his eyes off his impossible love. The procession passed by a low-hanging branch of an apopanax tree, and the thorns cut the woman's face, blood trickling down her cheeks and making her wince and eyes flutter. The colonel took notice of this and notified her husband that his wife was still very much alive. Though he was not entirely convinced, he took his wife home, and a few days later, much to his surprise, she woke up. 6 years later, the woman did die, and her husband had the apopanax tree cut down so it wouldn't disturb his wife's procession, as his heart could not bear another resurrection. Last but certainly not least is the story of a little boy named James P. Morgan. James was a playful and adventurous little lad. He loved to climb trees. His favorite tree to climb was the Y-shaped tree located near the entrance of the Tolomato Cemetery. One day in November of 1877, just 10 days after his 5th birthday, James climbed his favorite tree, lost his grip, and tragically fell to his death. He was buried near his favorite tree. His grave is a bit isolated from the rest, and you can make it out easily as it is the smallest headstone in the cemetery. James is often seen playing by his tree. He's a very friendly ghost. During this tour, our guide decided to make contact with him using some dowsing rods, which are used in paranormal investigations. This was a fun game for James, so we communicated with him very easily. Here is that footage.
Good evening, James. This is Bob, your tour guide. You know who I am. If you have enough energy to communicate with us tonight, can you please step up to the rods and make an X? There we go. Thank you. He's very, oh wow. Thank you so much, James. He's right off the bat. He loves playing with the rods. Thank you, James. I really appreciate it. Can you bring the rods to straight center, please, James? And I'll ask you another question. There we go. There we go. Thank you so much. James, could you do me a big favor tonight? Could you point the two rods in my hands? Can you point it towards your grave, please? You know where your grave's at, James. We'd really appreciate it. And it does take him a little bit of time to gather up the energy to move these two rods in my hands. Point the rods to your grave, James, please. If there are any other spirits besides James here tonight, there he goes. He's pointing the rod towards his grave. Good job, James. We really appreciate you communicating with us tonight. There you go. Can you point the rods to your favorite tree, please? Where did you like to play here at the, there you go. There you go. Thank you so much, James. You're doing a great job here tonight. Thank you. Good job, James. You're giving me a hug.
While all this was taking place, I felt a very innocent presence around me, and I got brave and decided to talk to James myself. I felt a cold spot and knew he was near. He was probably curious about my witch hat or my wheelchair. I felt an icy tap on my arm. I'm very maternal by nature, so I told him if he wished, he could hold my hand. I was amazed when I felt a tiny cold spot in my hand. My other hand was very warm, I should add. I asked James if he could smile for a picture, and I took the following picture of his favorite Y-shaped tree. If you look closely, you can see his adorable little face peeking out. And that brings us to the end of On the Broom. James, if you are somehow watching this segment is dedicated to you. I will be back very soon to visit you again, I promise.
Oh, hey! You made it back. I hope the ghost you saw today didn't frighten you too much. Go ahead, enjoy the rest of your Halloween. After all, it is the night designed for the dead to return to the earth. And remember, if you feel a chill go up your spine or you see something move on its own, don't be so quick to brush it off. It may just be a ghost. Happy Halloween! Whew, that was a really good book. Those people died in really tragic ways.